A woman is set to be executed in Texas. That's next week for allegedly killing her own daughter. Her name was Mariah. There's some evidence in this situation, though, that points to this potentially not happening the way that they said happened. Let's get to some of those details from The Guardian. So next Wednesday, pending a last-minute stay, Melissa Lucio, who's 52 years old, should be executed for a crime that significant evidence suggests that she did not commit. Not only that, but significant evidence also suggests that the crime for which she would be strapped into a gurney and injected with lethal drugs never happened in the first place. So a mounting body of intelligence, much of it never heard at trial, some of it actively suppressed by prosecutors, and not surprised to see that, points to a very different conclusion though. Mariah was not beaten to death by her mother. She died of internal injuries from an accidental fall. So April 27th is of course the date, as I was saying, next week they're looking to execute her. And some of the problems with the way the evidence was collected and gathered, and specifically this confession that they said they got, was a little bit of an issue though. So over almost 6 hours, stretching late into the night, they applied to Lucio the notorious Reid Technique. And that's a controversial interrogation method that has led to numerous wrongful convictions in the United States. So as this interrogation happened, she was in a very vulnerable state. There was other things that had happened to her. It was outside of just her own child. 2 hours earlier than that, Mariah had died. So think about the trauma you must be going through, things in your mind about that. But she was also pregnant with twins, and she was experiencing the grief from losing the young toddler there. So as trained to do under the system, the officers put their faces within inches of Lucio's, screaming at her that she, quote, had to know what had happened to her child. They had lots of evidence that she was to blame for that death, is what they said. And they forced her to view photographs of the girl's lifeless body as well. Horrific stuff. Then, as the Reid method dictates, they abruptly switched their tone. They gently reassured her that she could, quote, put this to rest if she would only confess to having caused this toddler's death. Lucio insisted over 100 times that night that she was innocent. But they went through 5 hours of aggressive maximization, is what they call it, and minimization is the technique, as the technique is known, and she reached her breaking point. So eventually she said, I don't know what you want me to say. I'm responsible for it. I guess I did it. And there's that confession, this coerced confession. So as she was also being interrogated by Cameron County detectives in a separate room in the police station, some of her other children, she had 9 children at the time, were also being questioned. They told investigators that her mother had never been abusive or violent in any kind of way. And also the children said that 2 days before Mariah had died, they'd seen their sibling accidentally fall down a steep flight of stairs on the outside of the house that they were renting. Lucio, who had been busy getting the children ready for school, found the girl at the bottom of the stairs crying. And since then, after that 2 days passed, there was a lot of sleepiness, a lot of sluggishness from the little girl, which would suggest a brain injury, potentially from that fall where she didn't see her and picked her up later as she was getting the rest of the kids ready for school. So then after that, within that time frame, she then passed away. There's other issues here with this trial, but we'll get to some of those now. But first of all, we saw these holes in this story, and also holes in the way that they interrogated this woman, and actually put a lot of traumatic images in front of her as she was doing it. And now this has gained all this attention because we've seen this story a little bit too many times, James.
Yeah, so look, some of you wonder, Cenk, why were you Republican? What did you believe back in the day? And so that's a long story, but I bring it up in this context because, yeah, when I was Republican, I believed in the death penalty, okay? So why did I stop believing in the death penalty? Because the Innocence Project showed that we were consistently killing people who hadn't done it. So at least 4% of the people, at least on death row, were exonerated by DNA evidence. They definitely did not do it. So we were gonna kill those people, dozens of people. And thank God that we found out ahead of time. Look, we shouldn't even convict someone unless we know beyond a reasonable doubt. That's our standard, that's our legal justice system. Let alone put them to death. You read the whole story here, no reasonable person would be sure beyond a reasonable doubt that she did it, let alone executing her. That's nuts. So now there's another thing that I used to believe when I was a Republican that it turns out not to be true, and that is confessions. So are all confessions false? No, of course not. A lot of confessions are accurate, right? But I used to think a confession is a confession. I mean, who would confess to killing someone if they didn't? Well, it turns out the answer is a lot of people. This is a well-known psychological phenomenon. And so people who have confessed have later been proven absolutely innocent by DNA evidence. So this has happened so many times. There's studies on it, etc. There's no question that it happens. And how and why does it happen? It happens just like this, where the person says, no, I didn't do it over 100 times. And then they wear them down psychologically. In fact, it reminded me of one of the interrogations that the CIA did under Dick Cheney of a quote unquote suspect of 9/11. They wanted him to admit that Iraq did it, but he kept saying, but Iraq didn't do it. And then they were gonna bury him alive. They say they were pretending to bury him alive, but he certainly believed it because he'd just been tortured ad nauseum. And then he said, almost identical to the woman in this case, I don't know what you want me to say. Do you want me to say Iraq did it? Okay, Iraq did it, right? They're like, good, that's it. All right, take him out, we got what we wanted. And so a third thing I didn't know, I had no idea when I was a kid how abusive police are. I'm just gonna keep it real. Sometimes they do this technique and they get someone who actually did it to confess. Okay, great. I'm not saying they should just teach, treat everybody with kid gloves, right? I'm from the school keeping it real, right? But they decided in this case that they were going to convict her no matter what. The kids are saying she didn't do it. You look back at it now, there's overwhelming evidence that she didn't do it. By the way, a lot of it was kept from the jury. 5 jury members now say, now that we saw the real evidence, hell no, we wouldn't even convict it, let alone execute her, right? So guys, be careful what you see. I mean, when I was growing up, a little bit older, all the media always told me that the cops always tell the truth and that the system is great and it works perfectly. Not perfectly, but it's, my God, we have a great justice system and a confession is a confession. If a cop says something, it definitely happened. Anybody really still believe that? And so we cannot execute this woman. This is insanity. And one piece of good news before we go to Bridget, shockingly, some Republicans agree. 32 Republican legislators in at least one of their houses, and I think a handful of Republican senators in Texas as well, are saying maybe being pro-life also means we don't kill the wrong person. Maybe. Okay, Bridget.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that the officials in this case just flat out made some racist, sexist assumptions that Lucio had to be an abusive mother. They didn't even let her really mount a full-fledged defense. And it sounds like they just refused to listen to any of the evidence or present any of the evidence concerning what actually happened. And I just wanna add that, we know that as is typical of women who are in prison or on death row, Lucia has experienced lifelong sexual abuse and domestic violence and also suffers from PTSD. And so, we have seen this story time and time again where women are victims of this type of coercion from police, just like you said. But the good news is that we have won clemency for sexual violence survivors before, folks like Centoya Brown in Tennessee. And I really truly believe that we have time to do it again for Melissa. If you go to weareultraviolet.org or Ultraviolet's Twitter account, we actually have a petition that folks can sign demanding clemency for Melissa because, as you said, it sounds like she is a victim of a lot of horrible things and that the police just made a lot of racist, sexist assumptions, assuming that she must be a terrible, abusive mother, even though her own kids saw what happened and said, no, she's never hit us, she's never abused us. And I think, we have just seen this story too many times where police are just adamant that this person must have done this crime, despite all of this overwhelming evidence that no crime was actually committed.
Police work has to be something that's hard because you have to find someone, almost the needle in the haystack. You have to have this skill to discover what happened and put together the crime. If you don't have that, don't do it. Instead, they're like, we have a conclusion. We just have to find some kind of way to get there. It doesn't matter as long as we get there. And also, by the way, if we're worried about her children and maybe the one that they say that she killed or allowed to die, whatever it is that they said, she has 9 children. What are they thinking about those other kids that she's got? What happens to them when you wrongfully convict and then execute their mother? Since we care about our kids so much, what's gonna happen to them? And then after they go through whatever system they go through, and then they end up with PTSD, and they become adults that don't know what's up from down as far as this world and who they can trust. Then what happens? They don't care, they got their conviction.
And so I definitely want to double down on what JR is saying there. So race is definitely a part of this. It presumably informed their decision without the evidence that she did it. right? So if they had walked into, and class is also an issue, if they'd walked into a fancy home with a white mother in a really nice neighborhood, would they have made the same assumption? I'm not sure they would have, but I would say at least as relevant a factor is laziness. Finding what actually happened. This is right afterwards, doing a real investigation, and then if you, at the end of the investigation, after talking to the kids, collecting the evidence, you begin to sense, oh, it really was her, and then you grill her. I get it, right? No, they grilled her from minute one. They walked in and said, okay, good enough. It's usually the mom or something or whatever reason. And by the way, one of the reasons that the cops stated, and they were so sure of it, is she had her shoulders down and wasn't showing much emotion when they walked in. That was your evidence? It's incredible how lazy they are. They're just like, who cares, put her away, just murder her, let's move on. And guys, I don't say that lightly. The government of Texas is set to murder her next week. So now let me tell you why she might have had the reaction that she did, and this is not me talking, this is the experts that said it. So first of all, she was sexually abused when she was 6 years old, and then in order to escape that situation, she was married off at 16, and that husband then committed tremendous domestic violence against her. So as a person who has suffered from domestic violence, sometimes they shut down in traumatic moments. So that might explain her initial reaction. Not that that initial reaction should have led to anything anyway, any assumptions anyway, but it also could explain why she finally gave in to her new abusers, the police, who were psychologically tormenting her. And she's used to, unfortunately, in her really, really hard life, men abusing her, then her having to consent to it. And that's almost exactly what happened here. And right wing, you hate big government, right? Big government is about to kill her. You're pro-life, right? Big government is about to kill her. It's not theoretical. She's a real human being, and they're gonna kill her next week. You can't let that happen. You just can't. Whether it's signing the ultraviolet petition, it's calling your Republican legislators in Texas to get more of them to join. You've got to put pressure on Greg Abbott to do a reprieve here and not, at a bare minimum, don't execute her and let's re-adjudicate this case at a bare minimum. Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.